The Murphy family was known for their extravagant reunions. Every summer, relatives from all over gathered at the sprawling family estate in the picturesque town of Willow Creek, New York. The estate, owned by James and Lila Murphy, had seen decades of family celebrations. This year, however, the joyful occasion would take a dark turn no one could have anticipated. The reunion on July 20th, 2023 was supposed to be like any other, a time for laughter, food, and reconnecting. James Murphy, 45, was a successful corporate executive who was admired for his charm and magnetic personality. He was married to Lila, 42, a former teacher turned stay-at-home mom, and they had 2 teenage daughters, Emily and Sophie. The family was the picture of perfection, or so it seemed. In the weeks leading up to the reunion, Lila began to notice James acting strangely. He was distracted, glued to his phone, and frequently late coming home from work. When questioned, he brushed her off, attributing his behavior to the pressures of a big merger at his firm, Westfield Dynamics. Lila tried to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut, but her suspicions grew when she overheard James on a whispered phone call late one night. The voice on the other end wasn't clear, but James's tone was unmistakably affectionate, intimate. Lila felt a surge of panic, but said nothing. She decided to wait and watch, hoping it was all a misunderstanding. The family reunion provided the perfect opportunity for her to investigate. James had insisted on inviting Claire Hunt, a rising star at Westfield Dynamics, to the event. Claire, 29, was a brilliant marketing strategist, known for her striking beauty and assertive personality. Lila found the invitation odd. Why bring a coworker to a family gathering? When Lila raised her concerns, James dismissed them with a laugh, claiming Claire was like one of the family due to her close work with him over the years. On the day of the reunion, the Murphy estate buzzed with activity. Cousins played games on the expansive lawn, uncles manned the barbecue, and grandparents lounged in the shade, reminiscing about old times. Lila stayed busy hosting, but her eyes rarely left James and Claire. They seemed overly familiar, whispering and exchanging glances when they thought no one was watching. As the day wore on, Lila's patience wore thin. She decided to confront James in private, pulling him aside into the study. "Is there something going on with you and Claire?" she asked. Her voice steady but cold. James hesitated for a fraction of a second before scoffing. "Don't be ridiculous, Lila. She's just a co-worker." "I'm not blind," Lila snapped. "I see the way you two look at each other. If you think I'm going to stand here and pretend everything's fine, you're wrong." Before James could respond, Claire entered the room. Her presence added fuel to the fire, and Lila, no longer able to hold back, demanded answers. "Are you sleeping with my husband, Claire?" Claire's face froze for a moment before she smiled, a razor-sharp expression that cut through the room's tension. "Why don't you ask James?" James's silence was all the confirmation Lila needed. Her chest tightened as betrayal washed over her. "How long?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Claire was the one to answer. "Almost a year." The revelation was like a bomb detonating in the middle of the reunion. Lila stormed out of the study, her anger palpable as she shouted for the entire family to hear. "James has been cheating on me with his co-worker." Gasps and murmurs erupted among the gathered relatives, their perfect family image shattered in an instant. Claire, unfazed, stepped outside, ignoring the judging stares. James followed after her, attempting damage control, but the damage was irreparable. Lila, humiliated and enraged, locked herself in the guest bedroom, vowing revenge. The fallout from the revelation was immediate and explosive. As the whispers and gasps spread among the gathered relatives, James and Claire retreated to the garden, seeking a moment of privacy. Lila, on the other hand, emerged from the guest bedroom with red-rimmed eyes and a determined expression. "I want you out of this house," she told James when she found him on the patio. Her voice was loud enough for others to hear, but she didn't care. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone I care about. Lila, let's not do this here," James pleaded, his hands raised in an attempt to calm her down. "We already are doing this here," she snapped back. her tone venomous. "You think you can parade your little affair in front of me and our daughters? Not a chance, James." Claire, sipping from a glass of white wine as though she were at a casual social gathering, interjected, "Maybe this isn't the time or place for a domestic dispute." Lila turned to her, seething. "You've already ruined my marriage. Don't you dare try to lecture me about propriety." At that, Claire smirked but said nothing. James looked desperate, trying to placate both women while dozens of family members watched from the sidelines. Too stunned to intervene, the tension remained thick for the rest of the day. Relatives whispered in hushed tones, some offering Lila their support, while others speculated about the details of the affair. James avoided Lila altogether, keeping to himself and Claire as much as possible. That evening, after most of the guests had left, Lila remained in the guest bedroom, nursing a glass of whiskey. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of James pacing upstairs. July 21st, 2023. The morning after the disastrous reunion, the Murphy estate was a ghost of its former self. Decorations from the party lay scattered across the lawn, and the once vibrant atmosphere was replaced with a suffocating silence. Lila had barely slept. She sat at the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the coffee mug in front of her. When James entered the room, the tension was immediate. "We need to talk," he said cautiously. Lila looked up, her expression cold. "There's nothing to talk about. Pack your things and leave." "I'm not leaving, Lila. This is my house too," James argued. "That didn't stop you from destroying this family," she spat. Before the argument could escalate further, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted them. Claire stepped out of the vehicle, carrying what looked like an overnight bag. Lila's eyes widened in disbelief. "You brought her here?" "She needed a place to stay," James said. Though his voice lacked conviction, Claire entered the house with an air of entitlement. "Good morning, Lila. I hope you don't mind. James invited me to stay for a bit." That was the breaking point. Lila stormed upstairs, slamming the door to the master bedroom. Later that night, the house was quiet once more. Claire had taken the guest room, while James slept in the study. Lila, however, was far from resting. Unable to shake the humiliation and rage she felt, she found herself scrolling through old photos of her family on her phone. The images of happier times only deepened her anger. Suddenly, a noise from downstairs caught her attention. It was faint, a muffled thud followed by what sounded like hurried footsteps. Lila froze, her breath caught in her throat. Grabbing a flashlight from her bedside table, she crept down the stairs. The living room was dark, the shadows stretching long and ominous across the walls. "James," she called out softly. No response. Her grip tightened on the flashlight as she moved toward the kitchen. That's when she saw it, a faint smear of blood on the tiled floor, heart pounding. Lila followed the trail into the dining room. There, she found Claire's body sprawled across the floor, a deep gash on her temple and a pool of blood spreading beneath her. Lila's scream pierced the silence, echoing through the empty house. Lila sat on the edge of the worn leather chair in the police station's interrogation room. The air was thick with tension, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Across the table, Detective Sarah Collins fixed her with an unflinching stare. "Let's go over this again," Collins said, her voice calm but firm. "You claim you heard a noise and found Claire's body. Is that correct?" "Yes," Lila replied, her voice cracking. "I told you I had nothing to do with this. Strange though, isn't it?" Collins said, flipping through her notes. "You have scratches on your arms." Claire fought back. "And yet, you didn't hear anything until after it was over." Lila hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. I don't know what to say. The scratches are from gardening. Ask anyone. I was pruning roses earlier in the day." Collins leaned forward. "And what about your husband? You're telling me you didn't hear James leave the study, even though your rooms are on the same floor?" "I didn't hear him because he didn't leave," Lila snapped. "Maybe you should be questioning him instead of me." Meanwhile, in another room, James was being grilled by Detective Moore, Collins's partner. Unlike Lila, James James appeared calm, too calm. "Your text messages with Claire paint a different picture from the one you're giving us, Mr. Murphy," Moore said, pushing a printed copy of the messages across the table. "She was threatening to expose the affair. You stood to lose everything. Your family, your reputation. That's quite the motive." James ran a hand through his hair. "Yes, we argued. She was upset, and I tried to calm her down. But I didn't kill her." "Convenient," Moore said, leaning back in his chair. "You were the last person to see her alive, and you admit to fighting with her. Why should we believe you didn't snap?" James sighed, his facade cracking. "Because I didn't. I was in the study all night. I didn't even know anything had happened until Lila screamed." Detective Collins reconvened with her team later that afternoon, frustration etched on her face. "We've got 2 suspects with solid motives, but no hard evidence tying either of them to the murder," she said. Forensics had confirmed that the glass paperweight found near Claire's body was the murder weapon, but it had been wiped clean. The defensive wounds on Claire's hands suggested a struggle, yet no clear fingerprints or DNA had been recovered from her body. The case took a turn when a neighbor came forward with a potential lead. "I saw someone leaving the house late that night," the neighbor told Collins. "Tall, wearing dark clothes. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time." "Did you see their face?" Collins asked. The neighbor shook their head. "No, it was too dark, but they seemed to be in a hurry." The new information cast doubt on James and Lila's involvement. Could there have been a third party involved? Collins ordered a canvass of the surrounding area, hoping for surveillance footage or additional witnesses. That evening, back at the Murphy estate, the atmosphere was tense. James and Lila avoided each other, each retreating to separate corners of the house. Lila stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the image of Claire's lifeless body or the cold, accusing tone in Detective Collins's voice downstairs. James poured himself a drink, his hands trembling slightly. He had his own secrets, ones he hadn't shared with the police. He had planned to break things off with Claire that night. She had been spiraling, threatening not only his marriage but also his career. Neither of them slept that night. Detective Sarah Collins stared at the case file spread across her desk. 2 suspects, 1 dead woman, and a vague sighting of a shadowy figure. It wasn't enough. Something didn't add up. She reviewed the evidence again, looking for what she might have missed that night. Her persistence paid off. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera captured the driveway of the Murphy estate. The video, grainy but clear enough, showed Claire arriving earlier in the evening. Later, just before midnight, a tall figure left the house, carrying what appeared to be a large bag. Collins's instincts flared. She instructed her team to analyze the footage for further details. Meanwhile, tensions at the Murphy estate reached a boiling point. James and Lila had been avoiding each other since the murder, but the unspoken accusations between them were impossible to ignore. "You think I did it?" Lila said coldly one evening, breaking the silence. James looked up from his drink, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what to think anymore. Claire was threatening to destroy everything, and you hated her. It wouldn't be the first time someone acted out of passion." Lila's face hardened. "And what about you? She was your mistress. Maybe you killed her to keep her quiet." Their argument was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Detective Collins, accompanied by 2 officers. "Mr. and Mrs. Murphy, we need you both to come with us." At the station, Collins revealed her findings. "The surveillance footage shows someone leaving your house with a large bag around the time of the murder," she began. "At first, I thought it was one of you, but then we analyzed the video further." She pulled out a still image, enhanced enough to show a partial profile. Lila's eyes widened in recognition. "That's my brother, Keith." Keith Lawson, Lila's estranged brother, had arrived unannounced at the reunion that weekend. A drifter with a history of financial troubles, Keith had often leaned on Lila for help. Their relationship had been strained for years, but she hadn't thought much of his presence at the gathering. Collins leaned forward. "We found his fingerprints on the murder weapon. He's not in the wind anymore, Mrs. Murphy. We brought him in an hour ago." Under questioning, Keith broke down almost immediately. He confessed that he had confronted Claire that night after overhearing her argument with James. Fueled by alcohol and resentment over his own failed relationships, Keith lashed out when Claire insulted him and his sister, accusing him of being a parasite. The confrontation turned physical, and in a blind rage, he grabbed the nearest object, the glass paperweight, and struck her. "I didn't mean to kill her," Keith sobbed. "It just happened so fast. I panicked and left. I thought someone else would take the fall." The confession shocked both James and Lila. Though their lives were in tatters, the truth offered some clarity. Keith Lawson was charged with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. At trial, he pleaded guilty, accepting a 20-year sentence. For James and Lila, the fallout from the murder and its revelations proved irreversible. Lila filed for divorce, unable to forgive James's betrayal, and moved to a smaller home with her daughters. James left his job and relocated to another state, hoping for a fresh start away from the memories of what had happened. The community of Willow Creek, once captivated by the Murphy family's seemingly perfect life, moved on, but the tragedy left a lingering shadow. Detective Collins, reflecting on the case, summed it up best. "Sometimes, the truth is stranger than anything we could imagine. One secret can destroy lives, but when you layer lies on top of it, the damage becomes immeasurable."